Today we want to take a look at David Cameron's comeback, its significance of it. We'll take a look at his life in time as well. We're going to hear from one of his biographers as well. But first, let's just try and put this into the political significance of all of this. Times Radio senior political correspondent Patrick Maguire is here. Patrick, I've been asking people all morning, really, sum up David Cameron's comeback in a word. Michael Heseltine said it was excellent. Tim Shipman from the Sunday Times said it meant a new ending to his ongoing literary saga of Brexit. It might now be the end point of it. What went through your mind, bearing in mind that we're on the radio and so you can't swear? What was your first thought when you heard this news?
Well, the question reminds me of the bit in Chris Morris's The Day Today when John Major punches the Queen and Spartacus Mills, the crisis correspondent played by Steve Coogan, is asked to sum it up in a word, and he says he can't. And then Chris Morris said, well, can you sum it up in a noise? And Spartacus Mills just goes, ah! And that was basically how I felt this morning, because it was just completely blindsided the entirety of Westminster, with the exception of the very tight circle who knew about this. It genuinely defies any of the cliches you would ordinarily reach for in this moment, which isn't the same, by the way, as saying it's going to be transformative for the fortunes of Rishi Sunak's government.
Let's deal with the other big event of the day. Suella Braverman out as Home Secretary. We think specifically because of her refusal to change her article in the Times last week. Had he not gone for David Cameron, the sacking of a Home Secretary for any reason is a huge, huge deal. This week of all weeks, with the Rwanda ruling coming as well, would have been a huge deal. We haven't heard, I don't think, anyone who's come out particularly cross about the Suella Braverman decision so far. Is that just like all done and dusted, and by this time next week it'll be Suella who?
It's really interesting, that, isn't it? In that for weeks and weeks and weeks we've heard that sacking Suella Braverman would make her a martyr on the right of the Conservative Party, that immediately, as the Times reported on Friday, that 2 ministers would go if she went. Those 2 ministers haven't gone. I think we can safely assume Will Quince and Nick Gibb are not the Suella Braverman solidarity campaign. So you look at this and think, is the Suella Braverman right of the party Praetorian Guard narrative the dog that didn't bark? I think it's significant as well that James Cleverly, broadly popular across the span of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, has been appointed Home Secretary as well. So I think for the vast majority of Conservative MPs, there's very little to complain about in the appointment of James Cleverly. And given that it's all been eclipsed by David Cameron anyway, I do think that we may see in a week's time, a fortnight's time, a couple of months' time, just like Priti Patel before her, Suella Braverman, shorn of the trappings of office, is sort of not the huge figure we thought she was.
Well, let's speak to two people who now know David Cameron better than most. Kate Fall, now Baroness Fall, was Deputy Chief of Staff to David Cameron when he was in Number 10. Hi, Kate.
Good morning, Matt.
And James Hanning, who was with Francis earlier, the author of the definitive account of the David Cameron years, David Cameron's biographer. Hi, James.
Morning, Matt. Morning.
Kate, did you know this was happening? And if not, what was your reaction this morning?
Well, David did take soundings from some of his, just one or two of his sort of closest allies, but it certainly was a shock. It certainly wasn't what I was expecting. I do commend Rishi for putting someone of such stature and experience in an important job at such an important time, and not minding to have someone sort of senior, a tall poppy alongside him. It's refreshing to see a Prime Minister who's happy to do that.
What did you make of it, James? Is this a sign that actually David Cameron hasn't really enjoyed the last 7 years in the shepherd's hut, trying not to lobby for anyone?
Well, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I was thinking earlier, the oldest cliche in the book is that all political careers end in failure. And David Cameron, would have more reason than most to think that, given the from his point of view, the disastrous referendum result. He held the referendum and got the result wrong. And, for a lot of us, that's been a sort of calamitous mistake. And he's had to live with that. That was, of course, compounded by the Greensill thing, which didn't make him look great either. So, given the opportunity for one last gig, you can see he would probably want to seize it with both hands. For how long it lasts, we'll see. But no, I think he's always wanted to be a politician, and no, he's back in the saddle. So he'll be delighted, I think.
Kate, when you mentioned he was taking soundings, is this he sort of asked you in general terms, would I be mad to go back, rather than talking about specific jobs?
No, I mean, I think, look, I mean, the fact is that, it's a big move for him. He will have most of all, talked to his family, his children and his wife, and they're the most important people to him. But, look, things are very difficult in the world today. We've got the Middle East, we have tensions in China, we have Ukraine, Russia. Having someone of his stature with his experience on the world stage at this time is a really good move for the country. And it's an honour for him to go back and do public service. He believes in that. I think it's good for us and good for him. And I think it's commendable of Rishi to have reached out.
I suppose some people listening to that, Kate, will think, well, all the things you just listed, China, he tried to get in bed with China, and every Tory Prime Minister since has distanced themselves from that. You talk about the Middle East, his track record, particularly in Libya, is pretty bad, given that they went in and removed Gaddafi and then sort of just packed up and left afterwards. And then closer to home, European capitals right across Europe, still pretty furious with him for calling this referendum and reassuring them it was all going to be fine.
Well, Matt, in answer to that, I would say, first of all, he saved lives in Libya. Second of all, he in China has changed a lot since Xi has been around for many years and moved to a more autocratic nature. So China has changed, and our reaction to China has changed. And in terms of the EU, he put a question to the country. We're a democracy. So on all of those fronts, I disagree with the viewpoint that you're putting forward.
Fine, but I was merely making the point that some listeners might be thinking, James, how do you think David Cameron puts himself sort of in history? He'll be aware of the Alec Douglas-Hume comparisons, albeit that the Tories went on to lose that election. Do you think he just hopes that actually, come late at the later point in his life, we come to see him for more than just losing the referendum? I mean, he's got to do something pretty spectacular. I mean, short of solving the crisis in the Middle East, he's got to do something pretty spectacular as Foreign Secretary for that not to ultimately be the first line of his political obituary.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine texted me and said, well, what's in it for him? And I think, it's a pretty tall order to kind of bury the memory of the referendum, as you say. On the other hand, I suspect, as Kate says, it's quite a big, kind of magnanimous thing of Rishi to do to bring him back. And he did, he was criticised by some people for not having a clear sense of direction and being more of a conservative by disposition than by kind of, having a checklist of things to do. But he was, by and large, fairly competent and shrewd figure, and I think he will be very useful to Rishi. The other thing, of course, is that this will rattle the bars of Boris Johnson no end. Because Rishi and Boris, we know, are not best of friends, and I think the fact that Cameron is now back on the stage will be, it may rile Boris a little, but no, it would be remarkable if Cameron, rescues this huge poll, this great losing position in the poll. That would be extraordinary. But he can mitigate the memory of his years as Prime Minister, and the most recent memory is probably the one that we'll have it'll appear in the foreground, as it were, of people's memories.
Do you mean Patrick Maguire back in that? Patrick, in terms of the politics of this, it is extraordinary that only 6 weeks ago, Rishi Sunak's previous latest reset was to position himself as the counterpoint to 30 years of a political status quo that had failed, which included, clearly David Cameron was in charge of the Tory party for a big chunk of that, and prompted David Cameron to publicly criticise him over his decision to scrap HS2. So you sort of wonder both, how long has this been in the motions for, and was there a lot of kissing and making up to be done?
Well, and indeed David Cameron also publicly criticised another policy position to which Rishi Sunak is committed, the cut in the 0.7% of GDP aid target. Yes, you imagine there was perhaps some awkward conversations. I'd be very interested to see who brokered it. It's not hard to detect the hand of William Hague, who of course is very close to Rishi Sunak and David Cameron. You wonder whether he had a role in this. In terms of the politics, though, I'm much more interested, less in that narrative, which is obviously awkward for Rishi Sunak, but what this means for the face of the government presents in two respects. One is you have a foreign secretary who is basically immune to the vicissitudes of domestic politics, a bit like Anthony Blinken, who can fly around the world not having to worry about, not necessarily having to worry about being re-elected or whatever. So that's very interesting. And the second thing, as you were saying, is, how do you sell this to the public? Indeed, will the public care at all?
One thing I wanted to ask you about, Kate, so is people pointing out that this now means that all 4 great offices of state are held by men. It's the first time that that's happened since Gordon Brown's, the last days of Gordon Brown's government. Alan Johnson, Alistair Darling and David Miliband were all in the top jobs. Does that sort of thing still matter?
Yeah, I do think it matters. I think that is definitely a shame. I hope, let's see what happens with the rest of the reshuffle, whether we see people like Laura Trott coming in, whether we see more women in the cabinet. But yeah, I think I take your point. But look, at the end of the day, he had, in my view, done the right thing to get rid of Suella Braverman, especially after this weekend. And David Cameron, I think, is a very good choice. So sometimes that's just what happens.
We should say that Theresa May has given her congratulations to David Cameron on his return to government. His immense experience on the international stage will be invaluable at this time of great uncertainty in our world. Looking forward to working together again. I don't know why I didn't go the whole hog and put her back in the Home Office.
There's still time. The reshuffle's not finished.
Get the old gang back together. Get Liz Truss in. She could be Chancellor. What could possibly go wrong? James, does this mean you're going to have to do an updated edition of your biography of Cameron?
Oh, I don't know about that. We'll have to speak to Francis Elliott, my co-author, about that. But yeah, he'd have to do something. I don't know. Never say never, but he'd have to do something pretty remarkable, as you suggest. And who knows? If the Tories won the election, then people would just saying, "Oh, well, there you are." Let's bring back Dave, and that was the secret.
That was the secret. It's unlocked it all. Kate, do you think this is going to be enough to kick-start the Tories' poll ratings, which basically haven't moved despite all of the many reinventions of Rishi Sunak that we've seen in the last 12 months?
It's difficult to tell, Matt. I mean, obviously they are, way behind in the polls. You have seen a bit of an attempt to build up momentum with King's speech and now the reshuffle, and then we've got the autumn statement next week. But I think, look, to me, I mean, and coming into next year, they'll hope to have sort of fresh faces promoting the big themes of the Rishi government, and hope to turn around the polls. I mean, we shall see. But I think the main thing is what's best for the country is to have some really good people in place. David Cameron, Jeremy Hunt kept in place. I'm sure James Cleverly will make a good Home Secretary, certainly better than Suella Braverman. So we shall see.
And what's your top tip to him when he's entering the House of Lords? What's the thing he needs to get his head round? How does the canteen work? Where are the loos? What's your top tip for
I don't think David Cameron will be spending very much time in the House of Lords at all. He'll be on a plane trying to help sort out some of these problems we're facing globally.
Very good. Although obviously he will be there answering questions, because that will be one key part of it. Kate Fall, Baroness Fall, good to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Former Deputy Chief of Staff to David Cameron. James Hanning joined us as well, biographer of David Cameron. Cameron, practically a Conservative, which he co-wrote, as you were saying, with Francis Elliott. Patrick Maguire, that was the book that revealed that David Cameron enjoyed chillaxing. Well, it turns out he's probably had enough
enjoyed chillaxing. Was nearly expelled from Eton for a bit of dope. But that's the thing too. You mentioned chillaxing. That is, speaking to friends of David Cameron and people who used to work for David Cameron and Tory MPs this morning, all of them have said to me, David Cameron has been really, really bored and unfulfilled over the past 7 years. So that is part of the reason why he would do something like this. But there are so many questions, who responds for the government in the Commons? Does David Cameron still get, as Rachel Sylvester was saying, still get that dosh that former prime ministers get? In 2010 he called Gaza a prison camp, both in the Commons and in a speech in Turkey. Is that still his view? Are we going to see a shift in the UK's position? What role does he want to play in the Middle East? Is he going to be, in meetings with MBS, etc., etc.? There's so many fascinating questions. And while this isn't going to shift the dial, it is obviously helpful for the government. Let's not lose sight of the first thing Rishi Sunak did this morning, which was sack Suella Braverman. It is obviously helpful for the government in some respect, even if it's very, very limited, to not have a Home Secretary who's veering off message every week, or indeed, as per last week, multiple times a week. So while David Cameron himself isn't likely to be transformative, Suella Braverman going is clearly good news for the number 10 comms grid, if nothing else.
And if you just wanted a reminder of just how tough things are for Rishi Sunak, while all this has been going on, there's been a drip of bluntly people who are not household names. Nick Gibb, Will Quince, Jesse Norman. Was there another one?
Neil O'Brien.
Neil O'Brien's the other one. All long-standing mid-ranking ministers.
Mid-ranking ministers broadly considered to be competent and good at their jobs.
And actually quite Cameroon in their politics, all announcing they are quitting the government, largely because they're standing down at the next election, arguably because they think they might lose their seats. And that's just a reminder of the state we're in.
And, if you
politics
quit
right
now, you've had a year out of government, so you can just take up a new lucrative private sector job.
With Greensill.
Yeah,
perhaps,
exactly. They've got a vacancy.
I don't know if that's still going. Patrick Maguire, really good to see you. Thanks very much for listening through that. The comeback kid then, David Cameron, rejoins government as Foreign Secretary in Rishi Sunak's cabinet. Suella Braverman out as Home Secretary. Turns out deciding who's Home Secretary is the Prime Minister's lifestyle choice. James cleverly replaces her. As for the rest of them, we're a bit unsure. Therese Coffey's now been in Downing Street, probably longer than she's ever been in there. We don't know. She obviously the Environment Secretary. She was widely tipped actually, she was tipped for the sack. The fact she went into the door as number 10, we think means she may well be being offered something else.